very appreciative. If you come down front, when I used to be a conference president in this building, I would tell people that black people don't have to sit in the back anymore in Alabama. We don't have to do that anymore. So I'm going to ask one of my former pastors, Pastor Moss, if she'll give us our opening prayer, and then we'll kind of set the stage for what we're going to do for the next 55 minutes. Yes, please, if you don't mind, Pastor Moss.
Let's pray. Father God, thank you for this opportunity to come to learn more about you, your word, and what's going on with our conferences. And we just pray, please be with those who are on their way back in the weather. In Jesus' name, amen.
Okay, here's what we want to do today. We want to kind of follow up on some of the issues that we raised today in the regional conference report. Thank you for coming. And then I have with me two of our regional presidents, Elder William Winston, who's the president of South Atlantic. He is the president of the President's Caucus. And then also we have President Roger Bernard of the Central States Conference. And they are going to be, this is going to be kind of an interactive kind of thing. I'm going to begin by talking about a couple of issues. One that we raised, two that we raised, one that we didn't, and then we hope that as you have questions, Dr. Jean, if you'll come on a little closer. We first of all, it's cold, so if we get a little closer, it'll warm up. I moved to Huntsville. My parents moved from Huntsville to from Cleveland to Huntsville 42 years ago, and I said to Pastor Moss, if I wanted to be this cold, warm enough, I'm gonna keep moving back to the Caribbean where I started. But I am going to find some warmth somewhere. All right, we want to talk. We want to kind of pick up with a couple of things that we talked about. I want to talk, and then Mr. Presidents, feel free to kind of jump in. One of the things that we talked about, and we said we wanted to put on the table for discussion, is the fact that we are, in my opinion, and keep in mind, I'm sharing with you what I've observed in the responsibility that I have that allows me and requires me to travel the country. It's a privilege, and so what I said in my yearly reports is to share with you, okay, I'm not telling you that this is the perspective, but this is a perspective. I might be going to all the wrong places. And so I'm not trying to tell you that what I'm telling you is definitive. There are some things that I have observed, and I wanted to make those a part of my report. One of the things that I wanted to talk about is kind of uncomfortable, and that is the paradigm shift that I'm seeing as I travel between the urban centers and the rural centers. What I'm seeing is the potential that we have for growth seems to be limited to our urban areas. I was in South Central Conference office for about 30 years. So I traveled around South Central for 30 years. I started off as youth director. When I started off as youth director, there were young people in our rural churches. I'm not seeing that anymore. It seems as though our young people have done what seems to be the trend in our country, and that is a movement away from the urban, the rural areas into our urban areas. What I suggested is, as uncomfortable as it is, because at least in a conference where I used to work, like South Central, the majority of our churches are still in rural areas. So we have physical buildings, but the people are in the urban centers. Okay, now the reason why that's a challenge, as I mentioned, is one of the things that's hurting us is the migration of particularly as it comes to upper income young adults. We have a migration away from regional conference churches. And last year I gave the example of my daughter, who she has migrated. Let me say that real quickly. My daughter is a church school teacher in South Central. I'm very proud. She is now teaching in the school where she graduated. As a little girl, she went to that school. She came back 2 years ago, and she's teaching. I shared with you I have a 4-year-old grandson, which makes me a very proud and excited and happy member of one of the best clubs in the world, the Grandparent Club. Come on, say amen. So it's a wonderful club, because you can always say to them, after you fed them and spoiled them and done all the fun stuff, then you can always say, it's time to go home to your mother. Yes. And I told you last year that I have the best of both worlds. When my grandson started preschool, so we only have him 2 days a week now, but since birth, he's been with us during the day, but Elder Brand, his mother takes him home every night. So I got the best of both worlds. I see him, and then he leaves. All right? So I told you, I shared with you last year, she lives near, she's about 5 minutes away from the Madison Campus Church. Madison Campus is the largest church in Kentucky 10. That's a state conference. It is their Oakwood, about 2,000 members. So she occasionally would take him to the children's Sabbath school there. The reason for that is their Sabbath school was just out of this world. I mean, serious. I mean, anything you wanted, they had. Okay, so she would occasionally take him, but because of how she was raised and who her father is, she's not leaving. But suppose she was raised differently, and her father wasn't the head of the Office of Regional. We would very well run the risk of losing her because of the gap between the Sabbath school in the state conferences and the Sabbath and too many of our Sabbath schools. Now, the other challenge that I've noticed as I've traveled as a former youth director, when I was youth director, what used to operate our at AYS and Pathfinders and Sabbath School, we used to be the best people in the world at that stuff. Okay, but that was primarily operated by volunteers. People like my mother, who said, my children are going to have a youth Sabbath school department if I have to do it myself, which he did. Okay, my mother was the early teen superintendent, then she was the youth superintendent, and then once her children grew up, then that was the end. So as a conference youth director, I made my living connecting with the parents of children in our conference. As I'm traveling now, I'm not seeing those same cadre of volunteers anymore, which means we may have to go from volunteers running this to to professionals. If we have to go to professionals, though, these presidents can tell you it's not like they have a whole lot of extra money to hire a whole lot of extra people. So one of the uncomfortable conversations that I raised, that I don't have to do anything more than raise because I'm not a president anymore, is if we don't have the money to add staff, it may require that we redeploy the people that we have. And that may mean at least some of our rural churches can no longer be pastored by, we may have to go more to lay pastors. Now, I'm not saying that's what we need to do, but what I am saying is we got to have that discussion, because where we're getting killed with our young families with children is our inability to offer the same kind of high quality children's ministries that we used to have. Right? Now, am I the only one seeing that? Or let me throw that out for this. How are we going to, is that something you're seeing where you are? And if so, how, one of my mottos in my office is we don't just talk about problems, we try to fix them. And if after we try to fix them, we can't fix them, we say, okay, we can't fix them. But we're not going to keep talking about the same old stuff. Like, since when I was a youth director, people used to say, we're losing our young people. And I always used to say, and so what are you doing about it? You know? Now, if we were saying that then, we really in trouble now, because most of our churches that I'm seeing have nothing for our young people. I mean, I'm not seeing a whole lot of Sabbath school. I'm not seeing any AYS. All the stuff that we used to do, we're not doing it anymore. All right? Now, the challenge for me with that is our state conferences are propped up by things we don't have. Our state conferences are propped up by their ability to attract people of color. Our Latino brethren, black people. Remember, I told you today, Dr. Bryant told me a very startling and disturbing statistic for me. He said he believes, he said, I can't prove it yet because our study isn't complete, but he says, I believe there are as many black people in state conferences as there are in regional conferences, right? So that means there is this out-migration of black people, and we need to stop talking about it. We need to start addressing it. And one of the things that's contributing to that is our inability to provide quality children's ministry like we've done in the past. Now, everybody's nodding on that. I'm seeing all your heads nod. What we want to talk about is, Dr. Nixon, if that's true, what are we going to do about it? Now, I'm hoping we got some other mics beside mine, but you can share mine.
I have a slightly, not to disagree with some of what you're saying, I have a slightly different view. My view is that the problem is education. Our educational system is slowly going away. And what is attracting many of our, particularly young adult parents with their children, is the educational system in the state conferences and the way that they attract our young adult parents is by subsidizing their educational system and saying, if you join our church, you will get the subsidy, you will get the lower tuition, we will educate your children, but you have to become a member of our churches. This is the This is the way that they are attracting our members, particularly those who have children. We have a number of, and this is true for those from African ancestry and Hispanic, who are moving towards the state conferences. So the issue to me is, what are we doing to create an educational system in the regional work that is affordable and accessible to our constituency, so that they will remain in our system and come back to our system? That to me seems to be what we should be focusing on. How can we begin to develop and maintain a system that is affordable and accessible to our constituency, so that they will remain in our system, as opposed to going to a system that they see as being more attractive, more affordable, more accessible, that will subsidize them sending their kids to their schools.
Before I come to you, Elder Brian, I have advanced a proposal that addresses part of that. In areas where we don't have church schools, or our church schools don't go up as far grade-wise, I've asked the question, why can't the church, in other words, if I'm the pastor of Riverside, right, and my school only goes up to 9th grade, but I have parents who want to educate their children in 10th, 11th, and 12th grade at Madison Academy, which is in the state conference church. Why can't I then provide a subsidy that addresses the difference between what they would pay if they were a member of Madison Campus Church and Riverside? Does that make sense? Okay, so that's, I've never it seems to me it would be less expensive to provide that subsidy than to lose that parent, and then not only the parent, but you lose the child. So that's a suggestion. All right, Elder Brian, and then Elder Brand.
A couple churches' names that were CPC, DC, State Conference, Black Pastor, we all well know, and a lot of folk that were in Allegheny East went over there. Bolingbrook, Tim was secretary. State Conferences are not just saying we're going to close down those urban churches anymore. They're hiring black pastors, and a lot of our young people or a lot of our older people are going, and they're hiring Wesley Knight in Georgia Cumberland Conference. I'm throwing out some names, and you probably know some other pastors in other conferences where they're not. There used to be a time when they would close down in the urban area if too many of us came over and we were there. They're not doing that anymore. They're saying, let's get one of the best from Oakwood, one of the best from one of our other schools. Let's bring that. Illinois Conference, they've got a couple of lay pastors, Ralph Shelton and then Gordon, right there in the inner city. And they're not closing down those inner city churches anymore. They're embracing black pastors, even if they're not paying them, and saying, we'll take all those individuals. Bolingbrook is a good example. So that's one of the issues that I think that we have to grapple with, that we have to be able to address and look at.
Is this on? It's on. Are you sure? Doesn't sound like on. Okay. And then, thank you. Okay, thank you, Elder. If you can help me with the roving mic thing. One of the things that we are talking about on the black leadership is the fact that one of the reasons why our Caucasian brethren are no longer closing down in urban churches is because of gentrification, which means that Caucasians are moving back into the city. And so one of the discussions that we have to have is, how do we minister to the people who move back into our neighborhoods that don't look like us? Now, Elder Brian, you and I were in school together. I don't remember any discussion about how to minister to those kinds of people. So I'm not pastoring a church right now, so it's not something that I have to do anything more than talk about. But it is a major issue, because either we write off the neighborhood, or we figure out how to minister to the people in the neighborhood, even if they don't look like us, and we have no preparation for dealing with them. I was preaching in Philadelphia a couple months ago, and the church was in the hood. But as my sister and I were leaving the church, when we turned around the corner, like a block from the church, there was this sea of people who didn't look like me. And I wanted to get out of the car and say, wait, don't y'all know? When I was growing up, y'all weren't supposed to be here. But that opens up a whole new area of issues that we need to address, and I don't know if we've begun that discussion yet. What does gentrification mean to ministry in urban areas? All right, because I'm gonna come to you. Because the stuff that we use, if you're a pastor in an urban, in the hood, then what you use, you do the clothing drop, you have the clothing pantry and the food pantry. But what do you do when the people around the corner, like Capitol Hill is a classic example? Those are like $1 million homes in that neighborhood. Them boys not hearing about food pantries and clothing drives. They own clothing stores. So we have to figure out a different way of ministering, including a different way of preaching. Because I know I'm used to preaching to poor people, or these people I think are poor. Now they not. Sometimes you look at their tithe envelopes, you think they're poor. But you say, well, the Lord will make a way somehow. You got a bill that's due on third. You preach that. But when you have people that you're preaching to who don't have those issues, they're not denominational workers. So they don't have those kind of money issues. So it changes. We got to have a conversation about how do we minister to people who are different than what we're accustomed to. Go ahead.
I just wanted to give an example of what was said over here. At my church, we do pay the difference between a high school subsidy. Our church school goes up to 8th grade. A whole heap of our folk were going up to Collegedale to go to high school, and they were joining the church, so we were losing folk. But what we did is we subsidized, I think this year is $250 per child. We have 5 students at that high school, so we pay $250 a month for them to go to the Collegedale school, but they're members of our church. And so what I did also, we had some people who were still members of the Collegedale church, and I told them, you can't come here and serve in offices and have membership at another church. I told them that's adultery. And so we had 31 transfers in 1 year. The associate pastor from the Collegedale church came down to our church just to see what was happening, because so many names were being read from their church, because we challenged them, you can't do that. And so that's an example of doing exactly what he said. We pay the difference in the subsidy.
And we had sometimes couples that would split up. One would have membership in the Georgia Cumberland Conference. I'm with South Atlantic, and we have Atlanta, and you won't find a white church in Atlanta. You won't find one, because all of the Caucasians have they left. Now it's a paradox, because regentrification is taking over Atlanta. Oh, they're coming in, buying up property that we have allowed to to just deteriorate, and they're building places to live in that we can't afford to live in. But as far as the churches in Atlanta are black churches, even the Georgia Cumberland churches. I have interviewed young pastors here at Oakwood just a few weeks ago. I go to Southern to do the same thing at Andrews, and the state conferences are beating us there. They're tracking our pastors, and they're getting the jump on us because who they're ministering to are people of color. We have a number of Hispanic churches in Atlanta metro area, but Atlanta is black and brown. And even those who attend the South Atlantic churches in Atlanta are driving into the city. They don't live near the churches. They can't walk to church. They can't catch the bus. They drive in from the suburbs. Atlanta, when you say Atlanta, you're talking about roughly 7 counties. And they live all out and are very comfortable. But they commute into church. And the reasons that I've heard, I'll ask people, why are you going to a Georgia Cumberland church? 2 things they tell me. I'll just tell you this. They say our services are too long and too loud. That's what they tell me. I said, well, come help us fix it. The solution is not to go over there where people don't want to worship with you and they're going to leave as soon as you get there. Come help us. Come help us.
Okay, well, I want to acknowledge the presence of 2 more of our presidents, Elder Henry Fordham, who's the president of Allegheny East, and we all know, if you were at church this morning, Dr. Clifford Jones, who just preached, he preached the word. And I thought I said, that's the elder, other preacher. That's the elder. Well, he stepped in, stepped out. I told Elder Jones I had preached Jonah before, and I am now embarrassed at the difference between what I preached and what he preached. So, you gentlemen, please feel free to. We're looking at some of our leadership, some of our challenges, and I'm going to ask the 2 of you, what is your conference's plan to address black flight? How are you all addressing it? Because Washington is a Potomac Conference. They're large. I understand their 5 largest churches are churches of color. And that is a particular concern for me, because it is quite possible, as I'm looking around the country, the largest single block of tithe may be the D.C. area, as we're looking. And so when you have that kind of hemorrhaging, it doesn't just affect Allegheny East, it affects all of us. Okay, so I'm going to ask you all in a minute and the same thing, Dr. Jones, I'm imagining you're seeing the same thing in Chicago, Detroit. Okay, how are we addressing that? Now, Dr. Nixon, I wanted to offer one more suggestion. How can we make church school affordable? I will tell you one of the things, a program I inherited when I was a young pastor in Memphis, and ended up being a blessing, and it tripled our enrollment. The church made a commitment that they would significantly subsidize if the members supported the church, if they were faithful in their tithe and offering, then the church would subsidize up to 50% of the tuition for any child. Okay, and so when we got there, it was a union school. So we weren't running it ourselves. But we started off with 27. By the time we left, we had almost 80 children from that one church in church school. Because if the church really looks at the church and really looks at the school as a church school and not a parent school, then that particular church made a commitment, including delaying for about 20 years getting a badly needed church so that they can educate their children. So one way, sometimes we look for other people to make church school affordable. In that particular case, the church members made church school affordable for the children that went to that church. So that's another potential suggestion. Now let me turn to these learned brethren. You probably, Elder Fordham, you probably don't want to use the term that you use in our board meeting for gentrification. You probably don't want to do that. But how are we addressing this problem in your conference?
I have observed that most of the challenges that we face can really be opportunities. You got to go way back to understand the significance of black people as it pertains to religion. When you go back to the book of Genesis, the first man that had enough power to be recognized as king was a black man. And of course he abused that power. And the Lord gave it over to the Jews in order to carry his truth. They messed up, went into slavery under another black man, Nimrod. And so it's always been black people that God has entrusted his truth with. And I haven't seen where that has changed. When it came into our era, at least into the more modern times, before the vision went to Ellen White, who some say was black anyway, it went to one who was definitely black. And I think it's because religion, when it comes to our people, is not just something we do. It's something that God has instilled in us. And now that it seems like the crop is drying up, maybe God is intentionally drying up what we're used to filling our churches by causing them to go across the line, and instead of lamenting why they went and how to get them back, I think God would let us look at where we are right now. And I'm saying that there's a whole race that's been untouched by the gospel, just like it was in Ellen White's time. And the white folk have deserted their own folk in the city. And they're not really growing their churches through evangelism. They're growing their churches through transfers of membership. But if we'll look at what's drying up, I think we can see there's a whole group of folk that we haven't been reaching out to, white folk are not reaching out to, and it's the white folk. I once said in one of our gatherings at the union, when three of our presidents gathered together, the two white presidents, myself, and I told them that God had to kind of change my feeling toward the sister races, because there was a time that I thought that if white folk didn't go to hell, Seventh-day Adventist white folk, then God might as well cancel hell, because the way they treated us is worse than the world treats us. But the fact is, we are so used to getting what we call the low-hanging fruit. And that's not putting anybody down. But even the low-hanging fruit, we're not being successful in reaching anymore. If it weren't for our Hispanic folk and for our Caribbean brothers and sisters, most of our churches would be empty, especially on prayer meeting time and Sabbath school time. They'd be empty, let's face it. And when God takes something from you, he very seldom, I've noticed, taking something from you without giving you something else. And I don't know that I've ever taken time to really establish a strategy for how to reach the people that are in the cities now that are not have access to the gospel. And we tried to fix it every now and then by hiring one or two white pastors and bringing them to our churches, thinking that that was going to bring more white people into the churches. But how could that work? You're going to bring one white pastor into your church and think it's going to turn white when they even leave their own churches when enough blacks come in? That's not going to work. We need to find a way to strategize and take the gospel to the white folk that are in our cities. They're the largest group of people that really are not being evangelized at this time. And when I say hiring white pastors, more white pastors, I'm not talking about one that is white but acts black. I'm not talking about one that's married to a black woman, because that's what they're afraid of anyway, okay? We need to reach out and get some of these white pastors, and the Lord has blessed some of these young white pastors. I mean, there's some gifted pastors out there, but we need to put them in the neighborhoods, drop them in there to start I don't care if they got a Confederate flag hanging on their porch, they need Jesus too. And they're not going to come to us. So we got to find someone that can go to them and plant the gospel. So while they grabbing all the blacks that are already baptized anyway, we need to ask the Lord to give us a vision as to how to reach those people that are in our neighborhoods, that we take up their parking spots and they're coming back in. And I don't mind using the word because they've heard it before. We call it regentrification. Well, I had a young black woman. She was not an Adventist, but we were trying to build an inner city project. And we made a mistake of using that word. She said, "What did you say? Regentrification?" She said, "No, it's denigrification, because if it was regentrification, our folk would still be here." So we got to find a way to empower, find a way to get our folk jobs, find a way to train our young men who don't have jobs, get them apprenticeships, because I believe that most of our black men would take care of their children that they out of wedlock, but they're not able to. And so the young lady who's carrying the burden of the child, she has to go to the law to get him to try to help her raise that child. And so he's running or he's behind. What's that going to help? But if we create jobs for them and create training for them and let them know, if you'll take a fatherhood class, then we'll get someone to give you apprenticeship. We'll tell the young lady, if you will attend the motherhood classes at our church, then we'll get the local supermarket to give you baby supplies and all these things. We got to find a way to help them where they are. At the same time, we got to find a way, ask Lord to give us a vision, how do we reach the white folk in our neighborhoods.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Oh, don't trip, Elder Ford. Don't trip. All right. Did you have? Okay. Did you? Okay. You had a question? Okay. No, we'll go to you, and then Elder Bernard, you wanted to say something.
I just want to go back to what you said at the beginning about the gentrification. Urban policy dictates that it's not about if it'll happen, it's about when it'll happen. So our churches are moving that way. So if that's the trajectory, then we need to already anticipate that, because that is what is going to happen, then that is what we have to address, right? In terms of answering your question of how you preach to somebody who already has everything, statistics say that they need, or whatever, just looking at the news, they do need what we have. The beauty of the gospel is that it addresses the emptiness in all of us. That's why you're finding it's now an opioid crisis, because they're searching for something that only Jesus can fulfill. So we need to look at our neighborhoods, because each neighborhood is unique in that way. And perhaps they may not show up in your church for Sabbath school or whatever it is, but they may show up for a financial peace seminar, or a mental health seminar, or how to deal with your drug addictions or addiction recovery and all of that stuff, because those are the things that they're suffering from. And they are also people who have a lot, want to see that they want to feel like they're giving. So if we create avenues for them to give, like missions and stuff, then they'll feel like, okay, these are people who are aligned, because as people are moving away from God, they're moving also away to themselves. So as we're giving them avenues to give and to meet God in those spaces, then perhaps we will introduce them to the Jesus that fills those needs and those spaces within them.
Very good. Okay, we're going to call on President Bernard. Then I want to raise two final issues that I've seen in the past year that I want to put before you.
Can you all hear me? Good? Okay. I want to bring another perspective to this as well. Because what I found is that people will pay for what they value. Many times our schools are not adequately taken care of. They're run down. We don't have great quality teachers. It's like we wait till the last minute before we not have a problem with it? And how can I expect our members to want to put their children there as well? So we have to develop what we have and make it highly marketable so that people will want to get it, so that we will have waiting lists. So let's invest in what we have so that it'll be something that we can be proud of. We want to beg people to come. They'll come and they'll bring their money with them.
Okay, now, Elder Bernard, we probably can't really blame all of that on your wife. You know, we can't I don't know if I remember everything I was taught in school, but I don't think it was just your wife. Okay. Remember we said that today I wanted to raise some difficult discussions. One of the discussions I thought of as Elder Bernard was talking about, it may be that in some of our conferences we have to reduce the amount of schools so that we can actually run the schools that we have in the kind of quality manner that you're talking about. Now, I'm a product of church school. My parents moved here 42 years ago so we could go to Oakwood. And that was after they moved to the only two homes I ever had. My parents bought them for their proximity to church school. One in Cleveland, one here. My parents moved 2 blocks away from Oakwood, so my sister and my brother and I could go to Oakwood. So nobody believes in church school more than I do. But if they're God's schools, they have to be good schools. And if we can't fund them, equip them, staff them, then we need to close them. Now, nobody wants to hear that. But I don't see how we're benefiting running schools that we can't afford. You know, I would, as a former conference president, I would rather, and this is heresy, and maybe that's the reason why I'm not a president anymore, but I would rather have one really good school than operate a bunch of mediocre ones. Because eventually you can't operate those schools. If as a parent, I have a choice between paying $500 a month and sending my child to public school and not paying anything, then what you're giving me in church school has to be good. Now, for me and my house, the fact that it was God's school was enough. The fact that it was a church school was enough for my parents, and it was enough for me. But this next generation doesn't see it like that. So instead of beating up on them, we got to market to them and understand that they're not going to send their children to the same kinds of schools that we went to, even though those schools were good enough for us. So we may have to have a difficult decision. I remember the first time I raised that as a conference president, I was almost sorry I didn't, because then people said, oh, well, he's talking about closing our schools, so we're just gonna let it die. You know, but I do think we have to have those kinds of difficult conversations that say, how many schools can we run well, and only do that. Now, let me in the last few minutes that I have, let me raise 2 more issues that I've seen. One is a conversation that we need to have about the problem that we have with so many of our state conference churches being populated by people whose background is not from the United States. A lot of our churches are populated by, a lot of the state conference churches are populated by our Caribbean brethren, our African brethren, and our Latino brethren. And so we need to have a conversation. I think, first of all, part of the problem may be that our our non-American born brethren don't know anything about regional conferences. So that when they come here, then the first place they look for, they don't understand regional conferences. They don't know anything about regional conferences, or if they do, what they've heard is not positive. We've kind of broken away and we're not legitimate. When the fact of the matter is, the reason why we have regional conferences is because the leadership of the church, which at that time was exclusively Caucasian, voted that given a choice between integration and regional conferences, they voted regional conferences. We didn't do that. They did that. Okay, so one of our challenges is we have not educated anybody, including our own young people. One of the reasons why, when you come back next year, if our building program actually is on time and on budget, you will see in that building the first African American Adventist History Museum. Somebody ought to say amen. Somebody ought to say hallelujah. Because when you don't tell your own story, somebody else tells it for you from their perspective. And what's being told is state conferences are the norm and regional conferences are the aberration. Right? And so, I'll give you an example. When I first was asked to serve in this position, Dr. Blue said, Elder Edmond, please come and talk to our young theology students about why we need regional conferences. And so they brought them all in this room, and I stood stood right where I'm standing now, and I said, I'm honored to come back to my former school and talk about regional conferences, but I need you to understand something. As the president of South Central Conference, I was on the board of trustees for Southern Adventist University for 7 years. At no time when I was on that board did anybody say, we need to educate our students on why we need state conferences. Nobody ever said that. Okay? We're the only people who have to justify our existence. And the problem is, we have to justify us to us. The people who are asking, why can't we all come together? That's more us than anybody else, right? And so we need to have a conversation with. We need to have a conversation that says, okay, is it that we are allowing other people to divide us? Or is it just we not having the conversation? One of the things I have to learn not to say African American so much, because my brethren who are from outside of the United States think that I'm not talking about them. But when I say African American, as somebody who started in the Caribbean, that's where I started my ministry, in the Caribbean. I'm talking about anybody with a regional conference background. That's what I mean. Because Northeastern, for example, most of our workers would not fit the standard definition of African. So I have to change my terminology, because that's not what I mean. People here, the reality is, this idea, this whether it's perceived or real gap or divide between African Americans and Caribbean Americans is ridiculous, because we all went through the same experience. The only difference between us and our Caribbean brethren is they got dropped off the boat sooner and in better weather. That's the only difference. And for us to allow ourselves to be divided, the only reason, now this is being streamed, so I got to be careful what I say, but I'm going to say it anyway. The only reason why a church that is overwhelmingly made up of membership of color, it's not close. The only reason why a church that is populated by people of color has leadership that is not perceived to be sensitive to people of color is because people of color chose that leadership. I'm gonna tell you what happened when I was in South Africa. Both weekends I was there, I ate with the pastors. And both weekends, the first question that was asked me was, Elder Edmund, when can we have a black president of the General Conference? Both weekends, I'm in Africa. So you know what I said, Dr. Jean? I said, now, I didn't come here for that. But since you asked, because I didn't want them to think that we came for, well, that's not one reason why we came. We trying to do ministry. We trying to build bridges. But since they asked, I said, we will have a black president when you decide. You the biggest thing in the church. And nothing happens in this church without your acquiescence. Then they say, well, Elder Edmund, but we don't have the money. And then they said, but then one of them said, but women's ordination, even though we don't have the money, women's ordination, that vote went the way it went because of us. And it did. The mistake that we have made is assuming that people who look like us think like us. That's a huge mistake. People who look like us do not necessarily think like us if they've been educated by somebody else. When I started in the Caribbean, the church was all black, but the worship service was all white. You know, nobody said amen. You know, the music was European. You know, and it did not change until some of those children start going to Oakwood. Okay, so we are expecting people who have no. And see, the other mistake we've made is until last year, there was no connection between us and that continent. None whatsoever. Meanwhile, because it's the job of the General Conference leadership to go over there, if they didn't go over there, then we would be saying, the only reason why they're not going over there is because they black. No, but they go over there. I'm going to come to you. And because a lot of those institutions are General Conference institutions, not only do they go over there, but they bring a check. They're supposed to do that. Okay? But so if you have, see, what we do is we say, okay, why aren't they listening to us? Well, there's no connection. And so what we're doing we're not trying to get their votes. We're just simply trying to build relationships and build bridges for a people who, when we got there, in essence said, what took you so long? That's what the president of the East Central African Division said to Mrs. Edmund and I when we went over there and sat in his office and said, would you be interested in a summit between Africa and us? He said, Elder Edmund, of course. And then he said, I thought our African American brethren didn't care about us because there had been no connection. Okay. So part of what I think our problem is just simply a lack of communication. And us not being intentional about making sure that everybody, no matter what color they are, no matter what their dialect is, that if you come into our church, you are part of us. Yeah, okay.
Well, I'm going to agree with you. What I'm saying, I'm Barbadian, Black American. And my beginning education was in Barbados, and then the secondary was...
No, I want you to hold your mic a little closer. No.
A little closer? Oh, okay. A Barbadian American, and beginning education was in Barbados, then secondary education in England, and then I came to the U.S. All of my history was taught from the British point of view. And I didn't understand why Black Americans didn't understand how I understood the Constitution and slavery, because everything was taught from their point of view. When you talk about music and piety, Barbados was only colonized by the British. There are some people who had the Dutch and the French and Portuguese and others. So that's indoctrinated in us. So when people tell me about things and about their protests and different things, and I'm listening and I'm understanding more now because I've been educated here too, I did not know what they were talking about.
And we as African Americans, we should understand that. Because if you're old like me, your worship style was taught by our brethren. If you're old like me, you remember back in the day, nobody clapped in church. Any old people like me remember those days? You didn't clap. If you were at a concert, you would wave the program. You couldn't clap. I grew up in a church. I grew up in a great church, Glenville in Cleveland. But there was a praise limit. That there was only so far you could go. And that has been so ingrained in me that, like today, when I told Dr. Jones, I said, the ultimate compliment I can give to you is I almost stood up. I can't get past my background. So I couldn't get up, but I was, because that's how I was raised. Okay? So if I was raised like that, you were really raised like that. Okay? And so we have to address this, because in a civil war, the only country you destroy is your own. And right now, we are addressing a cultural civil war that makes no sense. That's only, and you know, maybe, as I said this morning, maybe in a corner room, there's a bunch of people who don't look like us saying, let's figure out how we can divide them. Maybe that's what's happening. But the reality is, nobody has to help us divide us. We do that. And we need to stop doing that, because the only people that's getting hurt is us. Okay. Now I got one more issue and then I'm done, because we're actually supposed to stop. Somebody's preaching at 5 o'clock, so I was
going to introduce something else I think we probably need to address.
Please.
We need to codify our doctrinal understanding. There's a gap between the traditional Adventist understanding and a millennial and Generation Z understanding. You have two voices coming from the pulpit, and that's pushing some folk out.
And if I had an easy answer to that, Elder Brand, you would be paying big money for that. You're right. You're right. And it is a challenge as a pastor, because the older people want to know, why isn't the pastor taking a stand? And the younger people say, no, nobody cares about that. My kids tell me that all the time. Nobody cares about that. Daddy, you're the only one that cares about that. You know, so that. I have no answer. Yes, Counselor.
About 2 weeks ago, I was in Rwanda with the University of Maryland College Park, that's establishing a relationship with the university in Rwanda that's Adventist. And the reason the North American Division was involved was because the University of Maryland's in the North American Division. We thought it was a good opportunity for us to assist them in this affiliation. I think one of the other things that we could also look towards is our universities here also connecting with our universities there. University of Maryland College Park Public University is bringing all of its agricultural activity to work with an Adventist university there. And I think these are some of the other connecting points that go right along with what you're talking about, Elder Edmonds, that we've got to keep figuring out ways where we keep that messaging together. And I think that might be one of the things that we can look to as well.
One of the best things that we have done, and this man put that together, was the trip we made to Africa last April. You don't know, we had this beautiful agenda, everything planned, how we were going to talk, and that just flew out the window in less than 10 minutes. And they said, we thought you all didn't want anything to do with us. And we said, we were told that you all didn't want anything to do with us. And from then on, it got real. We talked, we were brothers, and the vow was we would never let anybody divide us again. And we had planned, because we don't have big budgets to travel, we had planned maybe 2 years that we'd go back to Africa and have an African summit. The president of the West Central Africa Division said, no, we want you all to come back next year. Come see us. Come west. Let us show you where the slave ships left from. And let us if you do Ancestry.com, I've got some family history that goes back to a plantation in South Georgia. But I decided, let me see where I'm really from. And I did Ancestry. And all of us were neighbors in West Africa. Did you know that? Yeah. Those are our people. And to have been divided for years and years and years, and we see each other at meetings and we just kind of wave. But when you sit down and you break bread with somebody, you talk to them and you get to know them. I am so excited about our trip in May. I want to see some of that. I want to experience that and see how we connect. We have 9 unions in North America Division. At the last general conference in Africa, they organized 70? A bunch of you, and we have 9 total in North America. And that's where the voting power comes from. The people who will sit on the nominating committee are union presidents. There are 9 in North America. So we're not there for the politics of it. We're there for the brotherhood and the sisterhood and the fellowship. And it was very much eye-opening, and I think we need to do it. We did have a fellowship at the most recent GC year-end meeting, annual council. We had some time. We now not only just see each other and wave. We know names. We know people. We know where you're from, and we have that connection. And we have to never let that stop again.
And that's huge. And that has, as I said this morning, that's opened up other opportunities. They asked Dr. Cox, William Cox, the president of Central Allegheny West, asked him to do an evangelistic meeting in Uganda. So in January, he's going in Uganda. In case y'all don't know it, nobody preaches like African Americans, which includes my brethren from the Caribbean. There's nobody that preaches like us. And this is not us saying that. That's them saying we need. I said it this morning. The secretary of the East Central African Division burst into our meeting and said, "Listen, you all have gifts that we need. We need this connection." And so it's connection for the sake of ministry. But when you have relationships, then there's an understanding that you don't have, and there's some benefits that come with that. But that was, as a result of that, I told you this morning, Elder Ben Jones and I were invited to go to South Africa. I was invited to come back. The conference, Elder Winston, that we preached in, they have 25 camp meetings at one conference. So they obviously need some preachers. So we had And they've asked, South Central has been asked by that particular conference to be their sister conference, to provide leadership. And the president said to me, will you train my newly re-elected officers? And I said, sure, we would be happy to do that. He asked for training in prayer ministry. So Elder Ruggles is scheduled to go over there. There is a desire for the gifts that the Lord has uniquely gifted the people in this room who represent the regional conference. Now here's the last thing, and then we're going to close. One of the things that I have not noticed a lot of, and maybe I'm just not going to the right churches, but there are some exceptions. There are some exceptions to this that I've seen. I'm not seeing a lot of young adults in the churches that I visit. And one of the challenges that I'm seeing is, I don't know if we can expect to have a lot of young adults if when they look at the people who are up front, they never see anybody that looks like them. You know, our church is still disproportionately operated by a certain gender and a certain demographic. Okay, and the only thing that's you're going to have to be intentional about addressing that. When I was young, we said you are not going to exclude us. So we kind of kicked the door down and all that kind of stuff. The group that I deal with, it's like, okay, if y'all don't want to include us, we're good. But everybody loses. Everybody loses, because when I talk to young adults, I was on a panel not too long ago in one of you all's conferences, and they were talking about the church like it was somebody else's church. Like, no. If you saying this is bad, you gotta own this too. You gotta come help us fix this. But we have to open up the door. And most of the time, they're not trying to say we want to replace all the old people. What they want is, now the reality is, let's just be real. Some of us, this is what happens when you have an office that you don't get elected. You can say stuff, all right? Some of us gotta step aside. I went to a zillion constituency meetings when I worked in South Central. I can almost tell you who the delegates are gonna be, because we elect the same people. And then when it comes to the large committee, we elect the same people. And then the nominating committee, we elect the same people. And then the executive committee, in a conference, some of these conferences are 30 and 40 and 50,000 people. You mean to tell me you can't find you got 50,000 people and you got people who've been there 30 years? I'm gonna tell you what happened as I was going out the door at South Central. I made a proposal to set aside some 2 seats on the executive committee for the executive committee. And you would have thought that I was proposing to change the day of worship. When all I'm saying is, in a multitude of diverse counselors, I'm adding to the Bible there, but in a multitude of diverse counselors, there's wisdom. There are things Pastor Fordham was with me today when they were trying to fix my technological issues. And so they said, now, Elder Edmond, here's what you need to do. And they started sprouting off all this technological stuff. I had no idea what they were talking about. Okay? Stop trying to reach young people with old people. Because there's some things that we simply don't speak their language. Just don't. We're going to have to, again, understand what I said. For most of the time, all it requires is just making room at the table. It doesn't require giving up your seat. Okay? But you've got to be intentional about making, this is us. This is us. We yell, and rightly so. I'm going to tell you a conversation, and then I'm going to let you go. I'm going to tell you a conversation we had with the General Conference president. You all remember last year when the General Conference president, and I invited him to preach when I was president here. He came and preached. He spent the weekend with my family. A nice person. We enjoyed having him. I've had a number of conversations with him, but there are just some things that we see differently. That's okay. It's okay. All right. But one of the things he made, you all remember in the sermon that he preached at Fall Council, they all decided to look like it was 1855. Not understanding that in 1855 things weren't that good for us. So we're not celebrating a church that we couldn't get into. Okay. But you know, they all look like, have these little string ties and the beards, and they all look like it was 1860. Okay. So then the president says, I want to warn you about several things. I want to warn you about unscriptural worship styles, unbiblical worship styles. Okay? Then he said, and I want to warn about an overemphasis on social justice. Firestorm. I mean, if the gospel went around the country as fast as that thing, man, we would be in heaven by now. I was flying that weekend, and as I was getting on my plane Saturday night, it was civil war. They were ready to succeed I was at a workers' meeting in one of y'all's conferences, and some of y'all pastors, let's succeed. Let's start our own. Let's get out of here. It was, because what the president said, however he may have intended it, was offensive. This is the reason why regional conferences are important. The president of the General Conference the hierarchy means that the union president deals with the conference presidents. But because black conferences operate differently, Elder Bernard and Elder Watkins pulled the president aside and said, Mr. President, that didn't go down so well. Okay? And by that afternoon, he was walking back away from that. He was talking about social justice like he was black. You know? He was quoting all the texts that we quote. All right? Then he said to us, I want you all to come and sit down and meet with me so that we can kind of hash this thing out. And so the presidents and Dr. Powell and I met with Dr. Elder Wilson. He had a nice little dinner, and then he opened up the floor, and we very politely but very firmly for 4 hours told him, Mr. President, this isn't good. You know, we said, Mr. President, as a white person, understand how it sounds to us when you talk about non-biblical worship styles. As a white person, understand how it sounds to us. And I will give him credit. I've been on the other end of those meetings where somebody's letting me have it. And he sat there, and one of the things we said to him was, Mr. President, one of the problems is that there are no black people in this building. That there's nobody from a regional conference in any of the upper layers of the church. The treasury level, the secretarial level, the vice presidential level, the assistant. There's nobody from a regional conference. That's not to deny great Ella Simmons, who does a wonderful job representing us. Some of the things that we're doing is because she's helping us. But we need somebody with a regional conference background. And there's not, and we knew what he was going to say. We knew that he was going to say, okay, the church is not so North American centric as it used to be. Because once upon a time, all the General Conference was operated by North America. We knew he was going to say that. So you know what we did? Before the meeting, we called somebody at the General Conference. You called your wife. I hope nobody heard that, because we might put her in jail. So I didn't say who I pointed, but I didn't say we. Everybody see who I'm pointing at? We called your wife, and we said, we need a list of everybody in that building who's from the United States, from a state conference background. And she gave us a list. So when he said that, we said, yes, Mr. President, we understand, but here's a list of 12 people who are from state conference backgrounds. There's 0 people from regional conference backgrounds. And he said, well, I have to be more sensitive. We said, okay, we'll see. And so, but again, I venture to say we're the only group, regional conferences are the only group of conference presidents that he meets with on a regular basis. And so why would we do away with the thing that gives people of color a badly needed voice that people who are not of color don't need because of their face? The reality is, in any organization, you either have a seat at the table, which regional conferences do. We're about, as the presidents, when we met last night, we have, by policy, 2 seats on the nominating committee of the General Conference just because we're in the regional conferences. Nobody else has that. The only guaranteed, even semi-guaranteed seats are union positions. We operate as a union. So before we listen to people who say, let's all come together. And I'm gonna tell you, I did this same presentation in Kentucky 10 conference for their camp meeting. And I said, y'all know what Kentucky 10 is? If you list all the regional conferences, that's not a regional conference. Okay? But they invited me to their camp meeting. And I had this same conversation with them. And I said, listen, you all mean well. Okay? But when you say let's all come together, what you really mean is you want us to shut down our entities and come to you. And I said, first of all, even though you don't mean it, that's an insult. What you're saying is the only diversity-worthy entities are yours. I said, that's not happening. And then I showed them that where we are growing 4 times faster. Now honestly, our growth has slowed down. But we are still growing 4 times faster than them. So I said, listen, if you're operating 2 businesses, right? One business is growing at this rate, and another business is growing 4 times faster. If you have a choice between which business stays and which business grows, which business are you keeping? They said, okay, the one that's growing 4 times faster. And a number of them came to me afterwards and said, Edmund, we thought that we were doing the right thing by saying we understand now. But so the people that we need to explain that next to are our own people, including the young people on this campus, who are the largest single source of future leaders and future constituents, who also don't know why we exist. But yet and still, these are the people who we are counting on to continue what was passed on to us. And that's why the African American History Museum is so important. And it is important to make sure that young people have a seat at the table. Elder Bryan tells me, and I'm done after this, Elder Bryan tells me that young adults make up 25% of the church membership. Do they make up 25% of the people on your church boards? Do they make up 25% of the people on your conference executive committees? Okay. If we don't like it when black people are excluded, and we don't, then why should we not understand that young people don't like it when they're excluded? Right. Okay. Okay. If this were a TV show, I would say you've been a good audience. Thank you very much. I think we have something to be proud of, despite all the obstacles. If black conferences were a union, we would be the largest union in North America in terms of membership and tithe. If black conferences were a division of what would then be the 14 world divisions, we would be the 4th division in tithe. The Lord's been good to us. We just need to not make him work so hard so that we can keep what he's given to us until the Lord comes. Elder Winston, come pray for us to close, please.
Elder Edmund, thank you. Thank you for being here. To be continued. To be continued. Let's pray. Father, thank you for our time together today. Thank you for allowing us to be a part of this great plan of salvation. We know that all of us are your children, regardless of the color of our skin, where we came from on this earth, and we want to do the work so that you can come and take us out of this earth. We realize that you have given us a special mission to our people and to the cities. Give us the strength and the compassion to do it. And we pray even so, come Lord Jesus. Thank you for being with us in this meeting. Thank you for hearing our prayer. In Christ's name, amen.
Test 1 2. Check 1 2 2. Check 1 2 2. Testing 1. Test 1.